Everybody, and welcome to the show. Today is our 100th episode, which is crazy to think about. And we're going to flip it today. We're going to have one of my best friends of all time, Dave Larson, who also was with me in the early days of the podcast. He's going to take over and he's going to interview me. I don't know what the results are going to be. I hope it's going to be good. I think it will be good. At the least, it's going to be fun. So we're going to do that. Before we get into it, though, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. I'm your host, Aram, and this is the 100th episode of One Step Beyond. One Step Beyond! All right, dude. Here we are.
Hey, here we are. So this is my thing to take over now?
It's you.
Okay, One Step Beyond. Here we are. Mm-hmm. My name is Dave Larson. I used to run a record label called Excursion Records, and I do a podcast called I've Known You Too Long. Aram's been on my podcast a couple of times because I've known him a long time. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I was here at basically the creation of this podcast, the idea stage when we were talking on the phone about what this podcast might possibly be, all the way up to about 3 years ago, recording our first couple episodes. What a fiasco, trying to figure out the equipment for that. Still have nightmares. No, I don't have nightmares, but it was definitely fun just figuring out what was going to work for us. And I think we got the technical stuff under control pretty quickly.
We did.
Do you know what's going to happen today?
I have a general sense of what's going to happen today.
All right. You are going to get blindsided by a bunch of your previous guests.
Okay.
But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the podcast.
Okay.
And about One Step Beyond and how you feel it's gone for the last it's been 3 years now, basically, since you've been doing it. And this is episode 100. How do you feel about reaching your 100th episode?
I feel good. I have mixed feelings. I feel good because I feel the podcast is way better than when we started, like with anything. So I feel good about that. I feel the conversations, and not because of the guests, but because of me as an interviewer, like the guests have always been great, but me as an interviewer, I've gotten better at interviewing. Our reach is different. We reach a larger audience now, a more consistent audience. I think I know what the podcast is about more. So that's been really cool. So yeah, I feel good about it. Where it's maybe a little challenging, the podcast, it takes up a lot of time. It's a huge push. And we're definitely reaching like wider audiences. And because my daughter is older now, the business is more mature now. I have a lot of stuff in my life that requires my time. I think a lot about how much time the podcast takes. And I start to think like, what's the point of the podcast? Like, where's the destination that we're trying to reach? Like, am I trying to become like a podcaster? Like, is that my thing? Or is this a thing that's going to help introduce the book to people? Or is this a thing that helps the business? I don't really have an answer to that. So when I think of the kind of other side of the coin, I think more like I've loved the podcast, and as we're going forward, I want to just be more intentional about why I do it and what the point of it is. So yeah, that's where my reflection on 100 episodes.
All right. And that branches right into the next question, which was, what is the why behind One Step Beyond? And how has that changed over the last 3 years?
Yeah. Initially, the goal of the podcast was to draw attention to the business. So I run a business called Cadence Leadership and Communication. And we are one of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of leadership and communication development firms. Like there's tons of them all over the place. And I'm sure I know that there are a lot that suck. I think there are a lot that are just fine. And I think there are some that are better than us. I wouldn't say a lot, but there are some that are better than us. And really initially the podcast the intent was to try and cut through all of the noise and really introduce people to the founder of the company, the person who's created the methodology that we work with, the head coach. And so they could connect with me and as a result, connect with the company. That has definitely changed though. What I think before was more of like a way that people could form a relationship with me as a business owner so they'd be interested in working with the business has become much more of a hub where people can have real conversations about leadership and running businesses. And I would hope it would be a place now where people come to have their ideas challenged, to have new ideas given to them, where they learn lessons that they can apply to their own leadership and their own business. So it's gone from something that I think was maybe a little bit like, I don't know if selfish is the right term, but like something that was about bringing people to the business, to now it's about bringing great leaders that I'm interviewing to the world, and so that people can learn from them.
Excellent. And along with changes in the way you look at the podcast, you've also had some personnel changes.
Mm-hmm.
For the first 2 years, I was sitting over there
Yeah.
often doing the recording and then doing some of the editing. And now you have some new crew.
Yeah. Spencer.
Hi, I'm waving and no one can see me.
It used to be Dave dropped the beat,
Yeah. Now it's Spencer drop the beat.
which is cool. I'm all about that. I think Spencer does a good job. If any of you have seen an increase in quality in the last year in the podcast, that's the reason.
Because of Spencer?
Oh, yeah.
Good work, Spencer.
Yes, definitely. As a person who actually got in and did the nitty gritty, I can see, I like watching it after I'm no longer there and saying, yeah, that's right.
Hashtag quality control.
On your shit.
Oh,
So with that change, what else has changed with the show over the last 3 years and really over the last year?
well, we got Spencer now who's doing all that, and all we talked about was a great quality control. But I'd also say Spencer and Tammy, and also I think Alex a little bit as well. Like our creative content team has grown, and definitely Spencer and definitely Tammy, and I think a teeny bit Alex. Spencer, how involved is Alex? Is that Alex involved at all in the
I
podcast?
think little bits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot more thought that's involved in the podcast. It's not just like, oh, let's get this business leader that I know or go after that. Now it's like more, well, what are we trying to say with the podcast? And like, what have we already covered? What do we want to cover more? Like, what are some of the harder conversations? And if anything, because I've got people like Spencer and Tammy and Alex as well involved, it's given me a bit more courage to take on bigger things and bigger leaps. It also just allows me to just be a good interviewer. I don't have to worry about anything else. So they handle everything from the front end all the way to the back. We've got such a seamless process now. I can just be in the interview. I literally just show up and interview people, and then I'm done. Spencer does all the pre-work. He does all the data collection, all the research. So it's cool. It just allows me to lean into my best side of the conversation.
Excellent. I think you can hear that in the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready, man.
You ready for what's going to happen today?
Let's do it up.
Okay. I'm going to ask this question first.
Okay.
And just to put you on the spot a little more
Okay.
before we hear from some people today.
Okay.
Who were your favorite interviews?
How many do you want me to pick?
Many as you want. Top 3. There's a lot of top 3s in this game.
There is. Why? It's kind of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say my number one favorite would be Johnny from Heart Supply. That really captured what I want the podcast to be more consistently. It was a long, very heartfelt, but also like super in-depth and serious interview with a very, very successful person who's also like knows what it means to be a great leader, but also like to look at yourself and be like, oh, maybe I suck as a leader and I need to grow. It was a really, really cool interview. Anytime I have had Carrie Fraser on the show, so Carrie Fraser, friend of the show, wonderful person and incredible leader. I've really enjoyed my time with Carrie. Carrie is insightful in a way that very few people are in themselves and willing to like really take leaps and drive. And I mean both internally and also just in her life. She's an incredible person. Both times I've had her on have been great. And the third one would be probably John Jenkins. So John, when we had that conversation, his ability just to tuck into all sorts of different kinds of conversations was really impressive and super cool. That was probably one of the funnest discussions I ever had.
Well, we're going to be hearing from some other folks today.
Okay.
Do you like the way that's
None of them are in
None
there?
of them are in there.
How dare they? Can I change my 3?
Do you want to?
No,
Okay.
that's fine. I'll let the betrayal fuel my answers.
I mean, this is 100th episode. You picked 3 out of 100.
I know. I mean, some of those people had doubled up. I already know one of the people who's asked me a question.
Listen, my guess is going to be that once you start getting these these questions, you're going to say, oh, of course. Why didn't I pick that one?
Okay, let's do it.
You ready?
Yeah.
The first person we're going to be hearing from today is Al Brown.
Aram, what do you got, buddy?
Aram, Alpha Brown here. You're turning 100. Congratulations. I thought a lot about you, your life, the things you do with it, how you put it all together. And I do have a genuine question for you, which is, what aspects of DIY culture that you are so deeply rooted and embedded in most help you navigate your professional life, and maybe even your personal life? What do you take from DIY that sort of sustains you? I'm interested. Congratulations on 100.
So first of all, thanks, Al. I also, before I answer that, Al just bleached his hair. He's got like like almost like a yellow pause top, and it looks sick. So Al, if you still have that haircut by the time this comes out, you rule. Thank you, and that was a great haircut. I like the change. What aspects of DIY culture sustain what I do professionally and then also personally? Did I capture it?
Help you navigate your professional life and maybe even your personal life.
Okay. So the aspect that definitely helps me the most personally and professionally is the buck starts and stops with you, and failure is just not an option at all. So what I mean by that is, like, for the first one, the buck starts and stops with you. If you're going to write a record, or you're going to start a band, or you're going to start a record label, or you're going to go on tour, nobody is going to help you. Like, they might help you. They might book you a show. They might do this or that, but they're not going to make your record good. They're not going to make your band good. They're not going to make you show up on time for shows. They're not going to do all of those little things. When you are in a punk band and you're in a hardcore band and DIY, literally you are the person that comes up with the idea, executes on the idea, and then enjoys the output or suffers the consequences of it. The whole spectrum is you and the people that you choose to do it with. But the buck starts and stops with you. And that level of accountability has personally and professionally been like a huge boost. So for the second one, failure is not an option. You know, the only way I can describe it is, if you tell someone you are going to put out their 7-inch, their record, and they have done all of this time writing and recording and all of it, failure is not an option when you're going to put it out. And I remember, Dave, you told me something that was so important for me to hear. The first time I was going to put out a record, I said, I don't know, Dave, should I put this out? And you said, are you willing to own 1,000 copies of this record? And I was like, well, I hope I don't have to. And you're like, that's not the question. Are you willing to? And I was like, yeah, I believe in that band enough that I would do that. He's like, then he said, okay, then you can put out that record. And it's the way that I've looked at everything. It's like, okay, I'm willing to own 1,000 copies, but I'm not going to. There's no way I'm going to, because I'm not going to let that happen. Or if I was to say to someone, yeah, I'm going to go on a North American tour, are you willing to be broken down in the middle of nowhere for a week? Well, I don't want that to happen, but I'm willing to have that happen. But I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that doesn't happen. Or if it does, that it's like totally worth it. So it's not that something bad, in my mind, it's not that something bad won't happen. It's not that something that challenges won't happen or the unexpected. It's the fact that you accept all of those things and you do it anyways, because no matter what, you're not going to fail. So failure is not an option. I'd say those two things, personally and professionally.
And there was a follow-up. It was at the end, he said, what do you take from DIY that sort of sustains you?
Nothing is promised. When I first decided to play in punk and hardcore bands, all I would think about is that Youth of Today song, A Time We'll Remember. And it wasn't about being in the biggest band. It wasn't about, being rich or touring international or anything. It was literally just about writing music, being with your friends, being at shows. So nothing's promised in punk and hardcore. Like, all it is like a community where you come in and you kind of make things happen yourself. But if you can make those things happen and you say, okay, all the elements are here, but nobody's promising me these things are going to happen, then if you have it in you to make those things happen, then they're going to happen. And it doesn't mean you're going to be in an awesome band or that anyone's going to care. It doesn't mean that if you put out a record, you're going to sell all the records. It doesn't mean you're going to write a good record. But the elements in punk and hardcore are all there. The community's there, the know-how's there, the infrastructure's there, but nothing is promised. You have to decide to make it happen. But if you decide to make it happen, it will happen on some degree. That's why that record is called Promises Kept. A lot of people thought it had to do with straight edge, but it was never about straight edge. The idea of Promises Kept was when I first listened to A Time Will Remember, all I wanted to do was get in a jam room with my friends and write a record and write songs. And then after that, my next goal was all I want to do is get on tour. And then I went on tour. Then my next goal was like, all I want to do is tour North America. And then we did that. Next thing I want to do is be on a record label. We'll do that. Next thing I want to do is go to Europe. And then it just kept going from one thing to the next thing. When I first started joining punk or like became a part of the punk scene, nobody came up with a contract and said like, hey, if you sign this, you're going to get all these things. There's no contract. Nothing's promised. But the elements were all there. So if you're willing to set big dreams and follow up with them and work hard, so on some level, you're going to achieve those, but nothing's promised. You've got to make the commitment, and then the promise is the promise you're making to yourself, and you fulfill that, then that's the promise kept. That's why that record's called that, and that's the thing that I'd say sustains me is that there's nothing promised. There's only opportunity to create something.
Right on. I wanted to add, since you brought up the thing about the 1,000 records, someone once said that to me. And they said that to me because they heard it somewhere. That is a piece of advice that has been passed down. I'm pretty sure since the second person wanted to do a record label, probably the first person said, you might end up holding on to a lot of these. And most of us that have done a label, we've got closets full of records that didn't move quite the way we thought they were going to.
Oh yeah,
and
man.
you do it anyway.
You do it anyway. Any great record label is 3 releases from going bankrupt. And when there was one that I put out on React, where there's 3 that I put out on React, where I was like, these are my 3. These are the 3 that pushed me into a huge amount of debt that I had to pay off. And doesn't mean I regret I don't regret putting them out. But it is something that if you're going to do anything, you have to be so willing to live with the consequence of doing that, and then do everything in your power to still execute on it. Who's next in this caravan of madness?
Okay, moving on. Sunny Singh.
My man Sonny. I just saw Sonny a few weeks ago.
Hey, Ram. It's Sonny from Hate 56. Congrats on your 100th episode of One Step Beyond podcast. I have a question for you today. What are effective ways of running a business and conveying ideas about your business when a large portion of your user base is functionally illiterate and can't be bothered to understand the basics of your business? And let's say you've tried everything from memes and videos and other ways of other modes of communication, and all of it fails. Are these people worth saving? Do you just leave them behind? What do you do?
You leave them behind. So when you're trying to build up a business, you don't focus on the detractors of the people who don't get it, but nor do you focus on the total like champions, the people who already get it. You focus on the people who are in between, the people who you don't hear from, the people who are neutral. So if you're thinking about anything you're trying to build or anything you're trying to change, you've got 3 audiences. You've got your detractors, and I'd also put in your detractors the people who are just like, as you say, like kind of ignorant or willfully ignorant. So you get your detractors, you've got your champions, so the people who totally get it, and like you have to give them so little information and they'll just run with it. In between that are the people I call the neutral people. So you can do this split like it's like a 20-20-60 rule. 20% detractors always in every situation, 20% champions. Never waste your energy on the detractors. And like just as Sonny was just saying, like I know the pains that Sonny goes into to communicate things effectively and tries different things. And you could even just see like Sonny is such an incredible person and such an incredible professional. Has built something so unique. Part of that is Sonny is an incredible problem solver. And so he's like always trying to figure it out. That's just an unsolvable problem. People will either intentionally or unintentionally, or not even think of it. They're just going to not read things. They're not going to pay attention, all of it. And there's nothing you can do about that. Those are the detractors. You never sink time into the detractors. It's a waste of time. There's always going to be detractors. But you also don't like spend too much time with the champions because that's an echo chamber and it's very dangerous to be in there because they're going to be with you no matter what. So spend the majority of your time building the unknown audience. That's where you spend your time. You do that through effective marketing, client outreach, like making yourself accessible on multiple platforms, trying different things. But it should never be trying to bring along people who have already demonstrated either from inability or with intention to not quite get it. It's a waste of time. And just to add in, Sonny, you're so talented and you're just a special person. I would love there'd be nothing more if you could take your time away from that and put it into all the incredible work. Find the unknown audience. The unknown audience is waiting for you. They just don't know you yet, but they're waiting for you.
I agree with that. And I think with Sonny's stuff being so out there with so much possibility for people to comment on what he does, his 20% probably sounds a lot louder than a lot of other people's 20%. He gets the feedback. And I understand it's just because he just filmed it doesn't mean it's edited and ready to go.
Totally. Sonny's in such a wild spot because it's like he does something that is so valuable and so important and does it with such like diligence and intensity and all this. But he's also in a position that most of us aren't in, where you're in a constant feedback loop. So as an example, as like a leader every day, I don't have people telling me what kind of job I do. I get like feedback here and there, like maybe I'll do a survey once in a while. Sonny's constantly on blast. What I'd say is you got to choose what voices to listen to there. Never listen to the detractors, but don't get too comfortable listening to the champions. It's always about having trusted people in your sphere who can give you real deal feedback, and then always trying to build a relationship with the unknown audience. That's 100% the push.
Yeah, most people aren't commenting.
No. Most people aren't commenting. A lot of the internet is a wild space. I'm glad I don't have to live on there. Bless you, Sonny. You're the best.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
Okay.
This is Michelle Rakshis.
Rakshis.
Hey, Michelle, I should know how to say your name. Sorry.
Aram, congrats on your 100th episode, and thank you again for letting me be part of it. Question for you. What do you feel is the key skill of inclusive leaders?
First of all, I love Michelle. Like real deal, like actual genius in the first place, but also just like decent, real deal human. Thanks so much for being on the show twice, Michelle. You're awesome. And thanks for that question. What do I think is the skill of the top skill of an inclusive leader? Being able to have very difficult conversations with people in a graceful way that keeps them centered in the discussion. So when we're talking about in creating an inclusive workspace, I'm going to use a line from Stephen St. Germain from TFS. Some people take it way too far, some not far enough. And I think about that line a lot when it comes to inclusiveness, because there are ways that people can try and be just too inclusive. And I don't mean like, you shouldn't include certain groups of people. Not at all. It's that there can become a spectacle of inclusiveness. It becomes less about what you're trying to do and just this like, I'm trying to do all of it as best as I can at all times. No. But then there are also people who do far too little. People who just do the bare minimum, or there's some change and they just kind of like, here's the change, and they don't have the conversations. What I'd suggest is if you're really thinking about inclusiveness, it's all about tough conversations. Tough conversations don't have to be mean conversations or angry conversations. It's the willingness of being able to like really speak with people within an organization, understand what do we need as a group? Where do we need to grow? Why do we need to grow there? If we're thinking about that growth and trying to create this inclusive space, what are the barriers? What are we afraid of? What's holding us back? Through tough conversations, you've got to demonstrate your ability to be vulnerable. And again, when I say vulnerable, it doesn't have to be some horrible, like, oh, I feel exposed, but more just be real honest about it. And that should encourage other people to do that. Having tough conversations is a very practiced skill. And tough conversations often get mixed up with people who can like, oh, I'm going to go and have that conversation. It's more like, hey, I want this workplace to be better. And what are the conversations I need to have with 1, 2, 3, 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people that are going to, over time, open other people up to talking, create the right kinds of environments so that we together can create a more inclusive space. No one leader creates an inclusive space. One leader can help create the ripples of the right kinds of conversations where we can get there together.
And when you say tough conversation, you reiterated it, but would a way of thinking about what a tough conversation is just any kind of conversation where you feel a little trepidation about having it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's, I think a lot about like authenticity and preference. So I think those are two different things. So authenticity is something that I think we all want to be authentic, but it doesn't mean that being authentic is comfortable. And this is what I mean by this. I think that most people, when they're talking about authenticity, they're talking about preference. There's all sorts of ways I prefer to be. Like I prefer to eat like ice cream every single day. That's my preference, but I know that's not good for me. So I got to not eat ice cream every single day. In fact, last night I was like, I'm going to get some ice cream. I'm like, no, I'm really trying to not eat sweets right now. Why? Because I have a goal in mind. It's uncomfortable to not eat ice cream. I'm forcing myself to not do something that I want. No, really, like last night I was like itchy, like, I want some ice cream. But I knew like, no, like don't eat ice cream. So I went out for a bike ride instead. I'm taking something complex and boiling it down. That preference always feels good, but it's not the right thing to do. It always feels comfortable, easy. It's the thing that we prefer. Authenticity. So preference always feels good, but it's not always the right thing to do. Authenticity is always the right thing to do, but it doesn't always feel good. So what I mean by that is like, you got to have conversations. Very few people wake up in the morning are like, whew, can't wait to go have that tough conversation and challenge someone's thinking. That's going to be awesome. Most people are like, oh, this is going to be terrible. I don't want to do it. That feeling actually should never go away. But what you add into that is the willingness to do it anyways, and the ability to, and then learning the skills that make you able to do it. So I'd say, or like around inclusiveness and having tough conversations, most people, the vast majority of people don't want to have tough conversations. So preference would be, I'm going to avoid having this conversation. I'm just going to put policies up and I'm going to virtue signal on the internet and all these kinds of things. That's not creating inclusiveness. That's centering yourself in it. Center the business in it, center the culture in it, center people in it. That means you're going to have the willingness to have discussions that you're afraid to have, but you're going to have them in an authentic way. That means that you've gone out and learned the skills that are associated with that, and the skills that are associated with being vulnerable in a way that's like, that's accessible to other people. And that's what I mean by it.
So as it relates to this idea of inclusive leaders, inclusivity, would you say that you need to have the difficult conversations? Because if you don't, the status quo just remains.
Totally.
And the status quo wasn't inclusive to begin with.
Absolutely.
So that's the idea, is that it actually requires the uncomfortable conversations you're talking about. Yeah. And an effective leader is going to know that, and they're going to be able to get into it.
Totally. And also the uncomfortable conversations are with all comers. So, I talked earlier about detractors, champions, and that kind of neutral party. When I'm talking to detractors, let's say about creating like an inclusive culture, I'm not going to waste a bunch of time there. I'm going to create the right kind of conversation. Like I'll invest the right amount of time, but I'm also not going to invest a ton of time with the champions. I'll spend a little bit more time with the champions. I am going to want to work with the neutral people, the people who aren't voicing their opinions, the people who I don't know what they think about it, the people who would probably prefer the status quo, or maybe they wouldn't prefer the status quo, but maybe they just don't feel comfortable enough getting behind the big push. I want to talk to that neutral party. I need to be able to identify who are detractors. That's part of the skill. Know who your detractors are, and don't just try and tussle with them, because that's just a waste of time. But I also don't want that glow of just being with the champions all the time, because I love being with people who think the same as me. Like, yeah, that's awesome. But that's not the work of the leader. It's that 60%, the neutral party. And the neutral party might be neutral trending towards a detractor. They might be true neutral, or they might be neutral trending towards a champion, but they need a leader to step in there. Otherwise, yeah, things stay the status quo. And the thing to know about detractors are typically highly charismatic and really good at swaying the neutral party. They're the people who like say, I never play politics. Well, yeah, you do. Just by saying that, you're playing politics. That's like a political statement. You're trying to identify yourself as someone who keeps it real. Real detractors are extremely skilled at taking anything off track that threatens them keeping their hand on the wheel in the status quo. So the job of the leader is to get in with the neutral people, and it's very challenging. It can be scary, but that's where you make the push if you want to create a more inclusive environment.
You're going for the swing voters.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
Are you ready for another one?
Yeah.
All right, let's talk to Styx from Liquid Death.
Oh, my man Styx.
Aram, what's up, brother? Styx from Liquid Death. 2 quick questions for you. 1, you're stuck in a desert island. All you have is a tape deck, and you choose 5 tapes. They can't be mixtapes. 5 albums, tapes. What are you picking? And then lastly, I want to know the gnarliest hardcore show you've ever been to. Hope you're well, man. Cheers.
So first of all, Styx, I think might be the best person in the marketing game, and I'm not kidding. Like, Styx is cool. He lives his brand. You can feel that his identity is really wrapped up with the organization, like in a healthy way. He's also just like a cool guy. I really like him. In this, he's also wearing another cool hat. That's 2 for 2 conversations online, and he's had a cool hat on both. I really, Styx, you're awesome, and I'm really inspired by you professionally. You did a great job. Okay, question 1, 5.
Yeah, not top 3. He wants your 5 Desert Island cassettes, and I actually think that is a good
Easy.
delineation. Okay, easy. Go for it.
Easy. Well, first of all, I like that he said cassettes,
Yeah.
because who the hell's going to have a record player on a desert island? Although that'd be sick. But, well, can I use a discography?
If it was released on cassette.
Mine with that discography.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no. You're going to have to, you know what? I'm sorry. In this
There's
case,
not,
you're either going to have to
there's-
use up 2 cassette choices to get both, or you got to pick one of the releases.
Minor Threat EPs.
Okay.
Tape. Bad Brain self-titled.
Okay.
Youth of Today, We're Not in This Alone.
Sure.
That's a good island cassette.
Which one?
We're not in this alone.
It's kind of ironic if you're there by yourself.
Eric B. and Rakim, Follow the Leader. It's gonna be a tough one. Gangstar, Moment of Truth.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's quite a list.
I'm here to live, man. So what's the
All right,
second
I
question?
think it's pretty unassailable.
I feel it's good. I feel that's a good one. That's a good one.
And there was another question.
Yeah. What was the other
It
question?
was, what is the gnarliest hardcore show you've ever been to?
Oh my god, man! There's so many.
Yeah, but there's got to be something that makes one of them the gnarliest.
Yeah, because it could be gnarly from like what I saw versus like how bands played versus like there's so many things. Give me a scope it for me. Is it like the craziest thing I've ever
I think
seen?
we're going to have to go with what you think Styx is asking for. It's not for me to say whether you meant they played best and that's gnarly and that version of gnarly, or whether you saw some gnarly stuff go down.
Okay. Detroit, Champion Agnostic Front Tour. We played with a band called Hate Inc. Incorporated. The singer, who I believe his nickname was Beast, I'm not sure, but Mr. Beast, if you're out there, kudos to you, had a tarantula tattooed on his forehead. Terrifying person. Very, very, very nice in person. We were warned by Agnostic Front. So Agnostic Front were the coolest band to tour with. Them and 7 Seconds are 2 of the coolest bands I've ever toured with in my life. Agnostic Front, who are dedicated partiers, even though we were a straight edge band, they treated us like family. And so every show, they would come into our back room. They would see what we didn't have that they had because they're a headlining band. And they would always take half of what they had and bring it over to us. Of course, they'd also take all our beer and everything because we didn't drink. But
It was a little bit of a trade.
yeah, but they always took care of us. And also they would never allow smoking or drug use in the back room because they were like, well, we want it to be a good environment for you guys. It was like they were the coolest, most real deal hardcore band. Them and 7 Seconds, the most real deal hardcore bands we ever toured with. But at one point, they said to us, hey, the closer we get to the East Coast, the less control we're going to have of the back room, just so you know. And Detroit is the first of those shows. We're just going to tell you, you probably don't want to be in the back room. So we actually took over this like little like, I don't know, like coat check area or whatever. That's where our back room was. So Hate Inc. played. And then I don't know if another band played, then Champion played. Before Agnostic Front played, the food came, the pizzas came. And I had the pizza. Well, first of all, the pizzas got delivered, but then we had like extra pizza, Champion extra pizza. And like the back room was just this like closed door that you could just hear things from on the other end. It was like clearly whatever savage like activity was going on back there. Was a wild time. I went up to this, like, I swear to God, this is one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life. I knocked on the door because we had extra pizza, and I just felt they probably needed pizza more than we did. I knocked on the door with the pizzas. I didn't say anything, just like knock, knock, knock. The door opened. I couldn't see anything at all. Just a big puff of smoke came out of the door, and some hand came out of the smoke, grabbed the pizzas, pulled it in, not a word of exchange. The door shut, and I still don't know what was going on back there. Then Agnostic Front played. They were totally amazing, as they were every single night. And yeah, that was a show where I felt anything could have happened at any moment. Like the coolest thing, the most scary thing. It was a moment where all of your senses are just like your spidey senses out. You got to have situational awareness, and also like the funniest shit was going on. The conversations I won't get into, but I still quote all the time. Like the wildest conversations were had at that show. It was awesome.
Fantastic.
You bet.
I think that's probably a good answer.
I feel, because I was trying to think what can I talk about? You know, there's so many wild, like in a good way, there's so many wild things. I've seen like crazy shows. I've seen crazy events. Some things I'm like totally horrified by. Some that I think is like the funniest thing. That's the one that stands out to me most, because like we're just these like nerdy little straight edge kids, and we are like caught in this whirlwind of like street culture / debauchery / like Detroit, old school Detroit, like punk scene. And it was like you had the ability to both be a complete audience member to it and also somehow be a part of the dance. It was really cool.
Right on. Are you ready ready to move on? We'll get back into some of the more serious topics.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That was serious.
It was a nice break.
That was serious to me.
Well, I absolutely understand. We got Ross Trenary.
Ross, my man.
Hey, Aram. Ross Trenary here. Grateful to be visiting the podcast again and congratulating you on your 100th episode. Big milestone. So I have a couple of questions for you now, turning the tables. First question, throughout the podcast, in all of the episodes, really, we hear a lot of great pieces of advice on how to be the best version of ourselves professionally. And my question for you is, what is the best piece of advice that you have not been able to put into practice for yourself? And as follow-up, what do you think might improve for you if you could do that? And what has held you back and kept you from being able to fully implement that in your own professional life?
Oh, that's a good one. So first, thanks, Ross. Ross is such a wonderful person. Dude, you rule. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and congrats on all your success, man. Some of the best advice that I got was from my friend who runs Outvoice, and it was about failing quick. And failing quick, he meant it in regards to businesses, like your businesses should fail quick so that you don't invest too much time in something that's not going to work out. The way I think about it is failing quick around hires, and I have not been able to do that. There's been multiple times where people have come into the company where I had like a gut feeling where it wasn't right relatively quickly, but I kept it going for too long. And the reason why, I'd say there's two reasons why. The first is I like helping people. Like if you look at all my jobs have always been helping people. I'll help my friends, help people in the community, I'll help people I work with. I like helping people because I love people being successful. The second is I'd say some of my leadership style is it's like too far of a 180 from a boss I had. So I had this boss that was just like awful, just a mean-spirited. No, mean-spirited's not the right term. Detached from humanity, like just someone who grew up with too much money. and had a very, very poor boss themselves, like a very poor mentor, and had very limited experience, but immense power, was like, you know, a business owner, had never worked anywhere else. Just someone who had a lot of money, a lot of power, and was very thoughtless in how they spoke to people and how they treated people. And it left such an impression on me that when I started this business, I did too much of a 180. And I've taken it too easy on people. I've been too permissive. And by the way, anyone who works for the company, it doesn't mean I'm about to drop the hammer. It's not that. It's that there are multiple times where I've had really strong gut feelings about something that was going on, and I let it play out too long. So the advice was fail quick, and I have not been successful with that. And the reason why is I'm very soft-hearted, kind-hearted, I'd say. I want people to be successful. And the second piece is I've allowed myself to take too much of a 180 approach to leadership from a former boss of mine.
There is more to this question.
Let's hear.
Second question. In my episode, we talk a lot about authenticity as leaders and as people. And one of the things that I can struggle with from time to time is knowing that there is a perspective or behavior that might be better suited to the situation that I'm in than the one that might come naturally from me as a typically flawed human being and leader. Do you have any advice for how leaders can push into that uncharted territory in a way that they're pretty confident is for the better, but where they worry that they might not be able to embody high authenticity because they're trying on something that is new for them?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So this goes back to something we were talking about earlier. That natural state is what I call preference, right? So it's like I'd prefer to be like this, but I actually know that's the way that I need to be. So when I do change work with people, as I do, that's my job day to day, I often hear people say, "Oh, I can't do that. That's not authentic to me." That is a bullshit thing. And I call it out hard. When people are like, "Oh, that's just not authentic to me," they're viewing authenticity as a fixed state, where I do not believe that 100%. Authenticity goes along a spectrum, but authenticity is usually something that's like a thing that you have to learn to get good at, where preference is just something that's like natural to you. Preference isn't always bad. There's some things that we just prefer that happen to match the moment, but there are a lot of things that we prefer that don't match the moment. So preference always feels good, but it's not always the right thing to do. Authenticity is always the right thing to do. You gotta be willing to step into things that make you uncomfortable, but do it well. And so to Ross's question, how does someone do that? For most executive leaders, it's about getting a coach. Get a 360. Find out what the real deal feedback is about you. Build a plan from there, and then work with a very good coach. A really good coach is going to teach you the skills that are associated with it. They'll help you build up on your pre-existing ability. So an ability is something you naturally have. A skill is something that you learn. So they'll teach you the skills and you learn it, and they'll help you work with your pre-existing ability. But here's the thing. When I say authenticity is a spectrum, anything can become authentic. I am a firm believer that anything can become authentic, except for things that cross moral or ethical boundaries. You can't be authentic with things that cross moral or ethical boundaries. But it operates in a spectrum where you're going to start off crappy because it's a new thing to you. You're figuring it out. You're faking the funk, literally. You're acting. But over a while, it becomes you. You create your own stamp on it. It becomes yours. So anything you learn, you're just acting it. But after a while, you figure out your way of doing it. And your way of doing it doesn't have to be the same way that I do it or someone else does it or your coach does it. But to be able to figure out your own way, you have to do it enough. And that's why you have a coach, because a coach helps you figure it out. You practice it with them. You work on it. You develop the skill over time. There is no skill. I believe that there's no skill that I can think of that most leaders can't learn. And it will take them about a year, 8 months to a year for them to own it, for it to become theirs. If it's an important enough skill, then you should put in that amount of work. Also, just because you've developed your own way of doing it doesn't mean it's the best. There are a lot of things that I can't do as well as other people. So for example, I'm not a great shot at basketball, but did I learn how to throw a ball into a hoop? Yeah, of course. If I really worked on it, could I get better? Absolutely. Could I be as good as a pro basketball player? No, definitely not. But I could become quite good at it if I worked at it, and I'd figure out my own way of doing it, my own approach, my own stance, and I get some help from a coach. That's how you do it. But just because it's authentic and just because you figured out your own way doesn't mean it's going to feel good. You'll probably be scared, nervous, fearful, anxious about it anyways. and you'll have the ability and the skill to push past that.
We've got one more from Ross.
All right. Wow. Ross.
Okay, let's get real and talk watches for a moment. So I know we're both a bit of hobbyists when it comes to watches. And in a new spin on your top 3 hardcore bands of all time question, which you've given to me and a few others, what are your top 3 watches of all time and what makes them cool to you?
Oh, that's a really good one. All right, I'll start with the number 3 position, Omega Speedmaster. I mean,
Oh, sorry.
see you, Ross. Omega Speedmaster would be my number 3 position. Why? I mean, watch worn on the moon, super incredible watch, long history. I think all the various reboots of it have been super dope. It was the first nice watch I ever bought myself. And it represents 2 things to me. So it was the first nice watch I ever bought. And I bought it because I got my first vice president role. And it was the first time I was making what I'd say is like serious money. And I wanted to celebrate. So I went, with my then, girlfriend. We went to it. I remember looking at the price tag and my heart dropping. I'm like, oh, should I do this? And I was like, you know what? I've worked super hard to get this. I'm going to do this. So that's the first reason what that represents to me. The second reason is I spent that money on that watch. And I had this person in my social circle who said to me at the time, well, this is your first nice watch and you've gone for one that's really expensive. Don't you think that's kind of like, basically it was like, it's kind of a poser move to like step into that world and buy like that nice watch. And it was like, don't you think if you're going to get into watches, you should start with something lower? And I was like, why? I've done my research. This is the watch I want. Well, it's just a lot of money. And I'll never forget that. It left such an impression on me because it's the really surround yourself with the right audience, the right people in your life. When I bought that watch, it was a gift to myself for working my ass off to get that role. And it was so hard to get that role and took so much work and I had to really withstand a lot of stuff. It meant a ton to me. And then you got someone who's just casually like pushing your face in a pile of shit. And it really stuck out to me about you have to surround yourself with the right people. The people would be like, hell yeah, you deserve that. Good for you, man. That's awesome. I celebrate that for you. Good for you. And it was such a moment of really recognizing that I was in a different playground. My life had changed. I'd gone into just a different world. And when you go into a different world and you're just kind of at a different point of your life, you have to reassess who's around you and you have to build your friendships accordingly. And that's why that watch, A, it's just a cool watch, it's got a cool history, but B, it played a pretty important role in my life. The second watch, I would say, Rolex Submariner. Just a sick watch, cool legacy. Love the look of it. There's no real reason beyond the fact that it's just like a dope watch. I really like it a lot. And then the number 1 watch, I mean, come on, X watch. I got to say, one time, my friend Nicole, who, hi Nicole, you're the best. I was in Boston and Nicole had started dating a new person. Nicole is a nurse a nutritionist, and she had started dating a doctor and who's totally not involved in hardcore at all. And she was like, hey, I want everyone to meet my new partner, my new boyfriend. And by the way, Nicole's gone on to marry this person. They have a wonderful family together. So Nicole invited myself, Trey's partner at the time, Chris Ryden's partner at the time, and a few other people who were all hardcore people, including Nicole. And we're all out at this dinner at this restaurant. And Nicole's then boyfriend, now husband, who's a total hardcore outsider, noticed that both Chris, Trey, and I were all wearing X watches. And he was like, oh, wow, you guys all have matching watches. Are you part of some club? And you could literally see every other person at the table lean away from the table. And one person went, oh, no. And Chris and Trey all leaned in. We're like, well, thank you for asking. And we all took off our watches and we were passing it to him. We're like, it's part of this thing called straight edge. And this watch was made and blah, 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 blah. And he was like, wait a second. This is like a plastic watch from the 80s and you just got it because it has an X on it because you're all straight edge. We're like, yes, indeed. And we're like, this is the coolest thing. And he was like, you could see the wheels spinning in his head. Like, you people are maniacs. But he's super polite. And he's like, wow, that's really interesting. Everyone at the table at this point is actively getting like agitated and being like, let's talk about something else. And we descend into crazy. Like we look at the back of their watches. We're looking at our serial numbers and we realize that Trey and I are within 100 serial numbers of each other. Like, oh, our watches are like Watch Brothers. Oh my God. And we are losing our minds. And this like highly educated doctor is watching these idiots devolve into like basically salivating fools over these plastic watches from the 80s because they have an X on it. I got to tell you, X watches are the sickest thing.
The sickest watch. They were made in what, 1987 for 1 year.
Uh-huh.
They're very fragile.
Very fragile.
I've never had one that wasn't broken. Yeah. And there won't be any more. Look, they've made other ones. They're not the same.
Oh, they're not the same. They're too big. Multiple colors.
I appreciate that they didn't just make the same watch. You still know if you've got an original and somehow it functions and will go on your wrist.
I wish they would remake the original just because I want to have backups. I need some backups. It's the sickest watch.
You can pay for backups. That's why it's sick.
Yeah. Well, also Ross knew this was going to be my top answer. Well done, Ross. I salute you.
Are you ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. This one is from Jason Wobbs.
Jason Wobbs.
Hey Aram, congratulations on your 100th episode of One Step Beyond. Wow, pretty good accomplishment, my friend. Hey, I have a question for you, and I understand for this episode that the tables have been turned. So my question for you is, when you think back to your days as a counselor, what experiences would you say have helped you transition into the world of executive coaching? Looking forward to hearing what you have to say about that. And again, my congratulations to you, Aram. It's pretty awesome.
Thanks, man. Jay, you're the best. I'm going to be with Jay and his team tomorrow. Jay leads this organization called Westland, and it is the best example of how a company can maintain like just like a real family feel, but still be like a national brand because they're a huge company and they're scaling and they're growing. They have a ton of acquisitions and they're very successful with their acquisitions because they have such a strong culture. So it's a huge honor to have him be on the podcast and ask a question. Jay, you're the best, so thank you. Okay, what did I learn? I will tell you 3 things that I learned. The first thing is a degree doesn't mean shit. So when I became a therapist, it was the Wild West. You could become a drug and alcohol counselor with just a certificate that you took on weekends for a year. You didn't need a psych degree or anything like that. And there were so many people doing such incredible work that were basically like very, very had minimum education. So I had a BA and a certificate, English BA and a certificate. And I'm not saying I was that person. I'm just saying a lot of people are doing incredible work. And then, of course, over time, the standards grew. I went and got a psych degree and then a master's degree in counseling psychology. Those things didn't make me a better therapist. Being a good therapist is about really meeting people where they're at, really understanding people, and then really being willing to look at yourself and kind of be like, how can I get better at this? Like, what can I do more? How can I shift and change? A degree doesn't do that for you. Because on the flip side, people that I have met who are very, very educated therapists were complete maniacs, and not all of them, but I'm just saying is I met as many really poor therapists as I did great therapists with advanced degrees. So a degree doesn't mean shit. That's the first thing I learned. And I remember when I got in that field being a bit intimidated by people with master's degrees and then being like, oh, you're just a challenged person who happened to go to more school than most people. I got it. So a degree doesn't mean shit. And that doesn't just mean for therapy. It can mean in anything. Doesn't mean a degree doesn't matter. And high degrees aren't all sorts of indicators, but I have met people with GEDs who are the smartest, most in touch, plugged in people who totally get it and are unbelievable. I've met people who didn't have a GED like that. I have met people with PhDs who are so bad at what they do. I've met people with law degrees who are completely lacking insight, who absolutely act like very, very poor behavior. So a degree isn't any kind of indicator of professionalism, knowledge, or ability. It just means that someone went to school. That's the first thing. The second thing I learned is if you want something bad enough, you're going to make it work. So a story that I tell a lot is that when I became a therapist, I was really good at reading people, but what I sucked at was, so my empathy was high, but my communication skills were terrible. And the first year of counseling, my boss took me aside and said, you should probably think of another career. And I was like, oh, what? He's like, you're a terrible communicator. You don't listen, you talk too much, your hands fly all over the place, and really critiqued all of my communication skills. And so much of what I do in Cadence is stuff that I built for myself to become a better communicator. So basically I went home that night and was like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job as a therapist. Like I'm not good at this. But it was wrong. I was really good at empathy, so I could read people. And I knew that my boss was right because I could see how my clients were reacting. I just didn't know how to do better. My skill set, communication skill set, was terrible, really, really bad. And I basically, everything that I built in the Cadence, I built for myself because I sucked at communicating, including like how to write a good PowerPoint, how to write a good email, how to use your physical presence, your verbal presence, how to ask questions, how to answer questions. And I was my first client. I trained myself extensively to get as good as I am. And I could right now go from this conversation and speak to 10,000 people, wouldn't miss a beat at all because I've trained myself to that level. And I hold myself to a super high standard. I constantly work in my communication style, but that's because I sucked. And I wanted it bad enough that I was willing to put in the work to get there. So if you want it bad enough, you're going to make it work. That's the second thing I learned. I'd say the third thing that I learned is just because something's noble doesn't mean the system is well built. So being a therapist and being part of the social work sphere, it's noble. It's good work. It's work for the people. But the leadership culture and cultures within not-for-profits can often be, not always, and I'd say, I hope not the majority, but some of them can be quite toxic. I worked at a not-for-profit. It wasn't the first one I worked at, but the first one I worked at had a good culture. The second and third ones I worked, though, I'm going to tell you, I couldn't believe the experience that I had. It was not that I had, that people were having. And it wasn't because the not-for-profit wasn't good, it wasn't because people cared, and it wasn't even because the leaders were bad people, but they were shitty leaders. And they wanted to help people. They were trained at, whether being social workers or therapists or whatever it is, that was their training. But where their training wasn't was leadership. You can have a noble endeavor, but if your leaders aren't good leaders, that noble endeavor might do good work in the community, might do good work in general, but what it's doing for the people that are doing the good work is very likely poor. So it's healthy outcomes while having a deep sense of dysfunction on the inside, and that's not good for anyone.
All right. You said something there. You were your first client.
Yeah.
I really like that. Hashtag.
On your shit. Hashtag on your shit.
First client. Something. Yeah, you can go work something out of there. Are you ready to move on to the next one? Okay. All right. The next question is from Chantal Hennessy.
All right.
Hey Aram, it's Chantal here, wishing you a very happy 100th. You don't look a day over 99. Great work, my friend. I'm so stoked for you and all that you've accomplished and all the positive energy you're putting out there. Thanks again also for having me on your podcast. It was my very first one and you're very kind. So I have a question for you. It's a controversial one. The hot question for me is, there's this term that we float around a lot. It's PMA, positive mental attitude. It's a term that I've used for a very long time, but I want to know where that term originated. A lot of people have coined the phrase and made it their own. They put it on t-shirts and whatnot. It's definitely a controversial topic, but who came up with the term PMA? Was it HR from Bad Brains? Was it Jim Rohn? Was it Napoleon Hill? I don't know. You tell me, Aram. And Thanks again for all you do. Wishing you well. Mwah.
Thank you. Wonderful person. Great professional, real self-starter. Someone that I like, if we go to that last question, it's like someone who just like, oh, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to build it there. And I'd say if anyone, that's someone who I actually say was maybe be in my top 3 of interview because her story is incredible. Thanks, Chantel. All right, PMA, you're cracking into a great question. So Napoleon Hill, although it's not actually in his book, Think and Grow Rich. He talks about the power of positive thinking. And then he did like some kind of follow-up thing with another author where they actually talk about like positive mental attitude is actually like part of the thing. But really popularized and taken into subculture through the Bad Brains. And how do I feel about it? I'm a super positive person, like very, very positive person, but I'm not a positive person like everything's going to be okay. I'm like a positive person in the sense of like, oh yeah, like I'll get there. Like I can make that happen. And, like I think largely we will get there with the recognition that it's going to be like difficult and crazy things are going to happen. So I'm going to break it down into ways of talking about it around motivation. So I believe that people can be avoidance-based or they can be achievement-based in their motivation. And that someone could be a mix of both given the situation. So avoidance-based thinking would be people that you do things because you're trying to avoid something, like avoid letting people down or avoid failing or avoid looking foolish or avoid losing everything and going bankrupt. So avoidance thinking, like you look at situations, kind of nightmare scenario them in your head, and that stimulates your activity. Like if this thing doesn't go, if I don't get this through, this thing's going to happen and this thing, and then I'm going to lose my job, and then I'm going to be out in the street, and you kind of chain reaction it from there. And not everyone thinks to that degree, but some version of that. So kind of cherry picking nightmare scenarios or cherry picking negative scenarios and then nightmare scenarioing them, making them bad so that it stimulates energy so that you will execute on things. That's one way of motivating. Achievement-based thinking would be achievement-based thinking is about competition, looking for things that bring out the best of you. Knowing that if you fail at something, it's just like, well, yeah, even if I fail at it, like I'm going to learn so much that will set me up for the next one. One sounds manic and terrible, and the other one sounds like, oh, that's so amazing. But I'm just going to encourage most people have like a version of both of them. And I actually kind of feel that both of them might fall under that idea of PMA a little bit. Positive mental attitude isn't about being some like super like pleasant or wonderful person. It's just that with a positive mental attitude, you're like, whatever is the thing that I'm setting on, I'm going to be able to achieve. I'm going to achieve this thing, or this thing is going to turn out a certain way, or this thing's going to happen. And I'm just going to be able to navigate the things in between. I'd say like lowbrow thinkers are the ones that are like, oh, it means always being positive. No, like I think people who are always positive are probably relatively agitating to be around. And people who are kind of like come across as negative thinkers, I don't think it necessitates that they're not positive. What I'd say is like positive thinking is more about anyone who's achieved a lot in their life, whether they've got a super like sunny disposition or a negative disposition, is positive, probably got positive mental attitude. It's about a way that you bring all of your resources together to achieve something. That's the way that I look at it. In regards to controversy, I mean, I don't care. Like if someone wants to put on a t-shirt, fine. Like, like I know like kind of the obvious person that I could talk about here. Where I'd put it is like, I don't want to criticize people. I think it's better to have a message of positivity going out than one of negativity or speaking poorly. What I'd say for people to think about is that like getting to the end goal isn't just about getting something over the line. It's about being a happy person, having a happy life, being balanced. I've probably only learned how to do that in the past couple of years. And that's because I had to go through the absolute crucible, the most nightmare scenarios I could ever imagine that all happened within a 5-year period, actual nightmare scenarios. And the thing that came out of it was I realized no matter what, I'm going to be able to achieve my goals without a doubt. Is it going to be hard? Is it going to be scary? Am I going to be pushed? Yeah, absolutely. Are there going to be times where I'm going to have avoidance thinking? Like what I say is like kind of negative motivators. Yeah, I'm going to achieve things out of fear of the consequences? Are there going to be times where I've got achievement thinking? Yeah, absolutely. Where I'm like just trying to compete to bring out my best. Absolutely. But I will never doubt that I'm going to get to that place. Never doubt it. However, what I've gotten a lot better at is taking care of myself, surrounding myself with the right people, building up the right infrastructure around me, taking care of myself, taking care of the people around me, not spreading myself too thin, really making sure that I have people around me that are also positive minded as well. And the number one ingredient is be around people who are successful. And I don't mean successful monetarily. I mean, whatever you're trying to be successful at, find people who are like that in your life. So I'll bring my friends Andy and Jacqueline in, who are parents that I really look up to. So this is today's man and his wife, Jacqueline. They're great parents. I aspire to be that kind of parent, because being a parent is like my most serious job. They motivate me to be better. I'm like, oh, they're so good with their kids. Like, that's what I want to be like. Great. They're successful parents. I find parents that I think are successful, business people I think are successful, musicians I think I'm successful, people who are just good at being friends. Dave, you're one of them. Like, how you're so successful at celebrating other people's success. You just want people to be successful. Like, you're successful at being like a good person and a caring person.
Thank you.
So it's like I surround myself with people who are successful. And some of those are people who are monetarily successful, but that's not the goal. So again, PMA for me is not the positive mental attitude that I'm like, everything's great. It's more like, oh no, I'm totally going to hit that goal and I'm well equipped to get there. The right forces and the right things will happen if I work and push hard, and I'll know how to take care of myself.
And when you talk about controversy around it, I don't think that there's all that much controversy around the idea of PMA and a positive mental attitude. I think there's controversy around the idea of toxic positivity and those two things being conflated.
Yeah, but the toxic positivity thing, like, first of all, I just feel like, I feel like there's so many opinions about everything right now. Toxic positivity, cool. Like, I have no doubt that's a thing. Am I going to spend any of my time talking about it? Absolutely not. It's like I don't want to say it's a non-issue, like a non-important thing to talk about, but it's not something that I'm going to spend my time talking about. Because toxic positivity, I mean, yes. Like,
we could probably, if we dove into it, we'd probably both come to the conclusion that it was a thing.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not saying
However,
it's not a thing.
I don't think it's the same thing as being positive and having a positive outlook in your life. I'm not going to try to be less positive because I'm worried I might trend into toxic positivity unless I'm getting feedback that is happening.
Totally. And I'd say it lays in the feedback. Like, I just like anyone, I see a lot of stuff on social media where it's like, I'm not even going to engage in this. I don't care. Like, toxic positivity, like, even talking about it now, it's just like, yeah, I have no doubt that it's a thing, but everything is a thing right now. And that is just not a thing that I want to put my time into. If someone came to me and said, you're too positive, I'd be like, great, tell me about it. Let's hear about it.
Right. We got to dig deeper on that.
Yeah. And it's just not a thing that I think it holds a lot of value for me to be discussing and for us to be discussing in general. Cause it's like, yeah, sure. That's a thing, but there are just a lot of more important things to focus on.
Yeah, I think personally having a positive outlook on life is it's benefited me my whole life, and that's why I think that's the main reason why I celebrate successes of people in my life. I want to see everybody. I want to see everybody do well. It just makes me happy to see other people doing well.
Totally. And again, the one last thing I want to say about toxic positivity, if I think about it, I think it's avoidance-based thinking. I'm not going to call that toxic positivity. I'm going to go back to the psychology of, avoidance-based thinking. And avoidance-based thinking, I'm avoiding thinking about these things because it makes me feel bad. So I'm going to gloss over it. I'm going to be pretty clear here. That's actually not necessarily a bad thing. There's all sorts of psychological defenses that serve a good purpose for us. Sometimes things are too negative, they're too traumatic, they're too big for us to deal with. So we have a defense about it. We have a psychological defense about it. And it's what you could refer to as kind of like a Coke bottle effect. And I got this from Christian Monks, who's a wonderful therapist. And he was on episode number 2, I think.
Yeah, early. The first day we recorded 2, he was one of them.
Yeah. So if you think about having a Coke bottle and you've got all this, like you've got the Coke bottle with the long neck and then the body like that, any kind of like serious trauma or negativity would be at the bottom of that. Not everybody's ready to stick their straw all the way down there and sip into that. It's just too much. So what we do is we fabricate a barrier in between it because that's all we can deal with at the time. Some people are going to fabricate things that are like kind of nonsense problems that cause like secular thinking. It's like beef on the internet, or it's like things that allow you to engage in some kind of conflict or some kind of challenge, something to overcome, but it helps you avoid dealing with the stuff down there. And some people might say, well, you should deal with the stuff down there. Yeah, over time. When you're ready, when you're psychologically ready to do it, when it's optimal to do that, there's all sorts of things that you can't just deal with because it's there. And for anyone to just be like, you should just deal with it now. What do you know? Like, you don't know everybody's problems.
It might work for them,
Yeah,
but it's not going to work for everybody else.
Totally. And the flip side is you could also create a little barrier that's like positive thinking. Like, everything's fine. Is it avoidance? Yeah, it's avoidance. But people avoid all sorts of things, and they avoid all sorts of things they could handle at the right time. So toxic positivity, we already dipped into it more than I even cared to. It's like, yes, it's a thing, but I just think it's like in large part an inconsequential thing for me to be discussing.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next question then. That's great. Chris Wren.
The man. My ex-watch brother.
So Aram, my question is about prioritizing tasks. I mean, as a small business owner, you wear a lot of hats. So what strategies would you suggest for a small business owner to help them prioritize all the different things that they have to handle?
First of all, Chris Wren, who put out a bunch of records that I've been a part of, and really watching him build up that business taught me a lot about how to build a business. So kudos to you, Chris. You're the best. I'm glad that we're in a place in our lives where adults where, we found each other again over time. You're the best. I really appreciate you. Chris also said something that was so insightful to me once. I asked him why he, it's when I was like an active musician on his record label, and I wanted it. It's like, you should be spending more time focusing on your record label, not Sully's, which is his t-shirt company. And he said something I'll never forget. First of all, when he said it, it was one of the first times I was like, oh, I am so full of shit. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I have an opinion, and my opinion is uneducated, because he said, well, Aram, the reason I focus my time on Sully's is because that's how I make my living. Bridge 9, I don't really make my living off of Bridge 9, because I believe once your passion becomes how you make your money, it interferes with how you do it, because now you have to make decisions based on maintaining an income rather than doing what you want. I always want to do whatever I want with Bridge 9, so I'm building up a business that allows me to draw a salary from that, so that Bridge 9 can stay real. And I was like, oh, cool. I don't know anything. And it's like, you know what? Anyone can have an opinion, but unless you've got some depth in your thinking there, then your opinion is probably not that strong. So around time management, the thing that I'd encourage any business owner to do is know what are the high value pursuits. What are the things that are going to what are the things you should sink your time into versus what are the things that either someone else can do or that you can get around to at will, like they can languish a bit. So there are a ton of things as a business owner that people need to feel your presence on. Do people need to feel my presence on whether or not, like for Chris's example, do people need to feel that his presence is felt about a record being packaged? No, nobody's going to know whether or not it's him. But do people need to, like Chris does all these videos about their new space they're building. Do people need to see Chris in those videos? Absolutely. That's a high value pursuit. Does Chris need to build every single piece of his new office? No, definitely not. But does he need to build the pieces of the office that he knows are foundational and that need to be done just a very specific way? Then yes. It's about identifying what are the high value pursuits that my audience needs to feel my touch on or feel my presence in, versus what are the things that can be offloaded or that can be held in the background to do later that don't matter as much. Any business owner has an audience, and that audience, you have to know what are the things where people need to feel my touch, need to feel my presence, versus what could be done by others or done later.
The next question is coming your way from Dan Wales.
The dude, Dan.
Hi, Aram. Congratulations on your 100th episode of One Step Beyond. Really excited for you. Really glad that you do it and love having it there to listen to and to learn from. So I have a question for you. In terms of overcoming fear, and when I talk about fear, I mean the things that we are not necessarily strong in, not necessarily coached in, or the things that make us uncomfortable. How do you recommend for people that they overcome that? Because I think in the workplace as well as in life in general, we're often held back by those fears. And if it doesn't come naturally for us to go after them and to push past them, how do you think people should do this? Appreciate the insight as always.
Dan is the best. So Dan, I was literally just talking about you today with our mutual friend Karis. You're awesome, and I'm proud of you. Okay, how do you handle fear? Well, you gotta get in the arena again. Since we're talking about Gangstar, enter the arena. But so you got to scope the situation. So the thing about fear is that fear creates like a valley, right? And fear often makes things so much bigger than they actually are. You've got to actually scope what you're dealing with. So the way that you scope something is you get in the arena, you try and do something, and you see what the actual reality is. Once you have a contrast point where you're like, oh, well, this is what it really is, this thing that I'm afraid of, like that's actually what it takes to be good at that, then you can create a plan. The biggest thing that you can do around conquering fear is expose yourself to that thing that you fear. And also, just to be super clear, we're talking about areas you want to develop. So not like if you've had a traumatic experience, I'm not saying go hop into that traumatic experience, but if there's something that you want to get better at. So let's just say public speaking. People are terrified about public speaking. Well, go in and scope it. Go find a situation where you can do some public speaking that's absolutely low impact. It will cost you next to nothing. It will probably cost you money, but it won't cost you anything reputationally, that you can just go and see how bad you are at it, or how nervous it makes you. Like go in and scope the element. So it's like, well, actually, maybe I wasn't that bad, but I was so nervous. Or maybe I was that bad and I was that nervous, but actually the content of what I had to say was actually pretty good. So I came across terribly. I was horribly nervous, but my content was really good. Or maybe I'm bad at all three and I was actually just like, I totally bombed it. Great. That's good. Get as much data as you can so you can scope out what the engagement would be to get better. You have to be able to get data to understand where you actually lay now, so you could figure out what going from like terrible or from good or from like pretty good to great is. So you got to go in, get in the arena and figure it out. Now I just used public speaking as an example, but what if it's about like, well, am I a good leader? Okay, well, why don't you go and figure out some leadership in other places? Go join a board, join a community group, go into a low stakes leadership engagement where you have to work on a team and have some kind of leadership within something, and see how you do. Get involved in local politics, volunteer somewhere where you can get into some kind of leadership position. There's all sorts of things you can do to scope where you are in your skill set, and your skills and ability, and then the work it will take to get to where you want to be. But none of that is going to be possible if you let that valley of fear exist, because that valley of fear is going to seem so much more enormous than anything.
An example that you just gave, I have a example from my own life. I know you're giving good advice, because I was terrified of speaking, not just public speaking. I was finding myself in a situation where, for some writing that I was doing, I was needing to pitch to industry professionals. And even just having two people in the room with eyes on me while I was talking was really impacting my ability to communicate my ideas. And in order to be able to handle this, I started going and doing open mic stand-up comedy. I was signing up under a fake name, and I was getting up and trying different stuff every time. And it was awful. It was painful. I got laughs a few times, but I found that as soon as I did that and went right into the arena and just stared at the thing that has been terrifying to me since show and tell when I was in grade school, the next meetings I had felt like a piece of cake. Yeah. And I started getting better results. I started being able to say, this isn't anything like when I had all those people staring daggers at me because I hated my jokes. So yes, I know it's good advice.
Yeah. One of the greatest fears that I had is I went through this really terrible period in 2016, 2017. And my mental health was really compromised. I was just in a bad situation. I was in a situation that would knock most people off their feet. And I was pretty close to being knocked off my feet. I was like maybe on like my heels, like I was there. And I remember Christian, the great therapist, said to me, the only way you're going to know I essentially, I had this record that was done. It was the change record, and I was terrified to put it out, horrified. I was like, I'm just gonna sit on this record. He was like, why would you do that? He was like, you're proud of the record. I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, why don't you just put it out? And I was like, oh, my life is this, and I'm blah 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 blah. And he's like, dude, just put out the record. The worst thing that's gonna happen is nobody listens to it. And I just thought, like, God, that's so simple. Like, yeah, nobody's gonna listen to it. Putting that record out was such a thing about, and it's not the only thing I did. I did many things to get back on my feet, but I had to step into the arena, and the stepping into the arena was putting something out that once it's out, it doesn't come back. It's out, but it doesn't matter whether or not people liked it. It was the act of putting it out, and then I could scope from there what needed to happen next.
Let's move on to the next question.
All right.
Wait, what was your comedy fake name?
He doesn't want to tell you because you can look it up on YouTube.
Nope, they've all been taken down.
They've all been taken down.
Doug Lawless.
And it was pretty good, man.
That's a good name. That's a good fake name.
Yeah.
You can actually still find a couple of pieces of Doug Lawless content, but they're not my stand-up comedy. They're just some other funny stuff. Listen, funny stuff. All right. We're going to move on. This is the last question.
Okay.
This is from Andrew Klein.
Oh, the man.
What's up, Aram? It's Andrew from Strife, Berthold City, War Records, and others. I want to congratulate you on 100 episodes of the podcast. It's been great. Been listening since the beginning, and I will continue tuning in. Today, I'll be asking you a question. How do you balance, I guess, your career, your hobbies, and your personal life? And what would you suggest is the best and healthiest way to not get too caught up in one facet of your life? So you're not too focused on just your business or just your hobbies or bands, or too focused on your personal life. And how do you find that balance, and what's the best way to do that? Thanks and congrats.
Thanks, Andrew. Speaking of putting out that change record and why it was so important to me, Andrew is a guy that we've kind of like traveled in sort of similar circles for many years, but we never actually met. And then putting out that change record was a life saver and changer for me in a lot of ways. And as a result, we put out the record, and Andrew plays in this great band called Berthold City, Beyond Strife, which is like legendary. They reached out to do some shows, which wouldn't have happened had I not put out that record. I consider Andrew amongst my very good friends. He is a wonderful person who does so much for the punk and hardcore community, and also has got a real interesting story. Had his own business for a long time, and now is a successful realtor. Just a really good, cool person who also played in one of the biggest hardcore bands, and it was actually a very big, just heavy band. And so he's played humongous shows in front of thousands of people. And also will play to 20 people in the basement of a bar in New Jersey and have an amazing time. Humble, smart, engaged, just a great person. So thanks so much, Andrew, for all your friendship and for that question. How to handle it. This is something that people talk to me a lot about because my life has a lot of facets. So I do everything all in. I'm totally plugged into doing things. Life, you've got to consider that life essentially has 4 quadrants. You got work, you got family, you got friends, and then you got your passions. Those are the areas of your life. Work, family, friends, passions. When I think of something that is an interest versus a hobby versus a passion, I'm going to get into that in a second. But here's how I do it. You only have 100% energy. I don't have 110% energy. I don't have 120%. I only have 100% energy. And my life splits up energy across those 4 quadrants based on what I'm trying to do. So as an example, sometimes I have to put more energy into work. I don't have more energy than 100%. That means I have to pull energy from those other areas to go into work. People allow their lives to get too stuck. So they, let's say there's a period in your life, in your career, where you have to put a ton of energy into work. So you draw energy from other places in your life. And again, I mean physical and mental energy, not Reiki energy, but real energy. You draw energy from different areas of your life to reinvest it in one area of life. So for me, career, I invested a ton of stuff in my career in many points. You can't let that be the new normal. You actually have to constantly be analyzing where you're putting energy and then recognize, okay, let's say out of 100% energy, I'm putting 75% of my energy, or say 70% of my energy, into my work. That's my like life's energy, like my time, my everything, right? 70%. That only leaves 30% for 3 other areas. Do I need to dish out 10% to each one? No. Like if I only had 30%, I'd probably take that 30% and I'd put it 100 and put it into my family. But then when I was able to pull more energy out of that work thing, then I'd start splitting it up. The thing that I encourage people to think about is like, this is an active pursuit. You've got to view yourself as being like, I only have 100% energy. Where am I going to strategically put energy for how long? And then how am I going to intentionally pull it back? Intentionally pulling it back is just like anything. Like if you're a runner and then you stop running for 6 months and you start running again, it sucks. It's hard. So if you put your energy into something, you draw energy from other areas and you focus it into one area, when you're done that, you actually have to like relearn how to like bring energy into other parts of your life and what that feels like. And there's more specifics about that that's involved in psychology, but it is like intentionally taking energy from parts of your life and then reinvesting it. I'm very good at moving the energy around based on what I'm trying to do. So sometimes I won't even think about my band for like forever. And then next thing you know, it's like one of the only things I'm thinking about, because I know how to pull energy from one place to the other. Very specifically though, around interests, hobbies, and passions. So I look at this very specifically. So your family's your family, and people define family differently. Like Dave, I consider you like to be a part of my family. You're beyond a friend. You're part of my family. But work, obviously what I do is work. I know what my job is. I've got my family. My family would be my child. It'd be Monica. It'd be my mom and dad, my sister. And then it would be my friends that are like family. My friends are my friend group, which is very, very focused on like a specific number of people. And then also a lot of acquaintances that I really like, but they're probably going to get less of my energy, but I really like them. They're great people, but I know who those people are. But then interests, hobbies, and passions. So this is how I define that. An interest is something that you like. You like, and you'll invest money into or whatever, but you have no interest in getting better at it. And being within groups, so part of the community that surrounds that thing, does not matter to you. So as an example, I love sneakers. Sneakers are awesome. It's a relatively new hobby or interest of mine. I got into it like, let's say 7 years ago. I really like Air Max 90s and Air Max 1s. I have a lot of them. So I'll throw money into that. I'm into it. Fine. I go onto sneaker blogs. But do I care if I get better at it? No, I'm not like trying to get like some like $2,000 pair of Air Max 1s. I don't care about that. I buy my sneakers to wear them. And do I want to be considered part of like the sneaker world culture? I'm not against it at all. Like I'm not saying anything negative about it. It just doesn't matter to me. So that to me is an interest. A hobby is something you'll invest time and money into, but you are actively trying to get better at. So for me, that would be running and cycling. I invest time and money into running and cycling. I'm always trying to get better at it. Like I'm trying to improve my skills. So I invest time and money and I'm trying to improve at it. But I also don't care about being within culture. Like I again, nothing against running or cycling or triathlon culture. I just don't care if I'm part of the running community. It doesn't formulate my identity at all. But a passion is something you put your time and money into, time, money, and effort. You're actively trying to get better at it, and being considered within group matters to you. It's part of your personality. It's part of your identity. For me, that's music, punk and hardcore. Obviously, I put a lot of time and money into punk and hardcore. I'm always trying to get better, write better records, put on better, like do better shows, have better art, like, be in there. And being part of the culture totally matters to me. And being well regarded within that culture, not like being quote unquote liked, but being a good steward of the culture totally matters to me. So again, when I think about my time, it's like, how much energy is required from work right now? What energy can I take from work and put into other areas? First of all, it goes into my family. If I have extra energy from there, I get to choose. Does it go into my friends and my acquaintances, when there will be like a scaled version of that for friends versus acquaintances? Or does it go into my passions? Or maybe it goes into some hobbies, or maybe it goes into my interests. I am that calculated with how I think about things, and I think about it like very specifically. I encourage people to do kind of like a life audit around how much energy you're putting into things about once a year to like twice a year, kind of like in the midpoint of the year, just so you're always making sure you're realigning your energy so that you can spend the right energy to get the right results at different points in your life.
And you can give that advice to people about knowing what those things are that you need to know how much to spread around, but it takes discipline.
Absolute, complete discipline and a willingness to really be real about yourself. Like I absolutely know a place where I can skimp on energy is not for my kid, but for my family, right? Like I look back at times in my life where I put too much energy into work and not enough energy into my partner. Like I look back at like kind of like my last job and I didn't put energy into my partnerships at the time because I was so focused on my last job and like getting there. And I needed to put energy into it, but what I wasn't good at is when I took that energy and pulled it out. So like around my family is where I know I can skimp on energy. So I'm very disciplined about keeping that energy there. It's because I learned that lesson. I used to put way too much energy into my friendships. And the thing is, it's like, if they're really good friends, they're solid friends, they're going to be there for you and you'll be there for them when you have time to invest energy into. Any friends that you have to invest too much energy into too ongoing, it's not that they're not good people, but they might not be the right kinds of friends for you right now. And then passions, interests, and hobbies, it's like you got to know where you spend your time. And I'm very diligent about that because I've built up the discipline to live life at full speed, which is what I do.
Life at full speed.
That is how I live.
Could have been a name for a podcast too. Hashtag
life at full speed.
Full speed. All right, that's all the questions.
Okay.
So now I'm going to ask you some questions.
Please.
Okay. I think you might have covered some of this in the beginning, but what would you say if you had to pick one thing? What's the biggest lesson about yourself that you've learned from doing this podcast?
From doing this podcast?
Yes, specifically related to the process of getting this podcast out.
That interviewing someone isn't about getting them to tell their story. It's about bringing out their story and bringing their story and your story together to create a mutual output.
A conversation is better than an interview.
Absolutely. This is not an interview podcast. This is a conversation podcast. And what I mean by that is like, there's nothing wrong with an interview. I think interviews are great. The value is me getting people to talk about their stories and bringing in stuff from my coaching background, my therapy background, my background playing music, my own ideas, my own experiences, and melding that with them so that we create a unique output that wouldn't happen unless we did that. Their story will always be their story. My story will always be my story. But through this podcast, we can create a unique output that will be around for people to engage with. Whether or not they found it valuable is another thing.
Okay.
And I had to learn how to do that. Before, I used to just get people to speak.
Just get them to answer the questions.
Yeah. And then I had to learn how to like bring my story in a way that also didn't override them or kind of like hog the spotlight, but to generate something unique that wouldn't exist otherwise.
And would you say for people that are trying to do that for themselves, you just really need to listen to what those people are talking about and pull from that for don't have a pre-written list of questions. You might have a roadmap for questions, but the next thing that gets said in an interview should pull right out of what they just said to you.
Yes, although something I learned from my interview with Taylor Young is that like Taylor is such an incredible guy, wonderful, wonderful person, smart guy. The style that I use was a bit challenging for him because he liked things to be more direct and more direct and a little bit more planned out. What I'd suggest is if you want to be able to engage with the diversity of audiences and different ways of speaking and thinking, you as an interviewer have got to be able to play to what your audience needs from you to create the right kind of conversation.
Read the room is always in play.
Always in play, no matter what. And so like my podcast isn't one thing. It has a baseline of what it is, but it can be different versions of that thing based on the speaker.
Okay. And from doing all these different interviews, having all these different conversations, which one do you think of these 100 episodes has kept you on your feet the most?
Probably the one with Johnny. Johnny from Heart Supply.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's like a very successful person, like legit successful person. And when I say big personality, I don't mean in a mean way, but like his presence fills the room when he enters the room. He's like a very, very successful business person who's like literally been through the shit, like the real deal, like built up a brand, super smart. To get the right kind of conversation going with someone like that, that guy's had conversations with everyone, up, down, of all sorts of different levels. To be able to play in a sweet spot where a guy like that or a person like that is like, damn, that was really worth, and to not only do 2 hours, but to want to do more time, which is what we ended up doing. It requires that you have to be so immersed in the conversation. It's a combination of intuition, street smarts, like that's part of intuition, and just knowing how to structure a really, really good conversation. So kind of like the traditional methods of doing that. I was both in the moment at all times and also like 2 minutes away from all times, knowing so I had to be like totally plugged in what was happening and also know where I wanted to go 2 minutes from now. That was the one I was the most on the edge of my seat.
All right. So now we're going to do a top 3.
Okay.
And we're going to wrap it up. Let's do what are the top 3 bands? Because a lot of what you've done in your time leading up to this was music. Mm-hmm. Did a lot of tours. You played a lot of shows. Mm-hmm. What are the top 3 bands that you've played with in your life? That you've played shows with?
7 Seconds, Agnostic Front, 7 Seconds, Agnostic Front, and Hatebreed.
And Hatebreed. Now, that's just a list of bands for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Tell me why those are the 3.
7 Seconds is every single thing that they say they are, while also being imperfect human beings. So, like 7 Seconds are the band that will watch every opening band, at least a few songs. They are truly progressive people who are like care about punk and hardcore and the values and all of that. They are that to each other. They are their lyrics. They are their music. Like they're just as real as it gets. And they're also human beings who have like problems and act certain ways and do certain things, but they're still willing to like have their mistakes and do their things appropriately in public. So they're not like gross on public, but like, you know, they're like a serious band and to still carry on. And there's also something about 7 Seconds, I guess, is just so human that they're not like although they are iconic punks, they're also just like, they just feel like your older brother who's like gone through the shit, but still like gets up and gets it done. Like they are the most inspirational band that I could possibly think of.
Me too.
Mm-hmm. Very real band, honest band, true band. They are that band. Agnostic Front, because Agnostic Front is like, when I was a kid growing up, Agnostic Front epitomized to me like just like the hardest street-based survival music, like all of that. And they're like just the nicest, like big teddy bear, like comedians. Like not only did we do a great tour with Agnostic Front and they treated us like family the entire time. We're just like these nerds to them, but like, well, that's how we imagined ourselves. And maybe they just treated us like family. Like, and I don't mean like quote unquote family. I mean like legitimate like family. And I'll never forget, we were playing in Pittsburgh and the venue let us stay afterwards and they left open their lounge and the lounge had a piano in it.
You called me from that lounge and I heard the story you're about to tell.
So Frankie, who was in Death Before Dishonor at the time, who was on the tour, plays piano like a angel. Like it was unbelievable. And he's just playing all these like everything you can imagine. And he would do like doo-wop songs. And Vinny Stigma and Roger Murray would sing like doo-wop songs beautifully. It was like shaboom, shaboom, la 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 la, shaboom, shaboom.
And I'm hearing this through a cell phone.
It was insane. And then they would do all sorts of different songs. And then Jamie Hatebreed would do like impromptu stand-up where he would just like insult all of us, but as if he was on it. It was like Bill Burr almost. Like he was just making fun of us. He called me a bargain bin Porcel. It was like unbelievable. It was so funny. And then every once in a while, and this happened multiple times in the night, Frankie would break into like gotta go on the piano, and everyone would get together with their arms around each other and be like, do this weird like almost gospel version. It's like, from the East Coast to the West Coast, you gotta go. The true sounds of a revolution. Gotta go. And then we'd all just go back, and then Jamie Hayfried would come out and start making fun of us all again, and then they would do more doo-wop songs, and this went on for a really long time, and it was like, I don't know how to explain it to you. Like, you grow up, you've got these tapes, you got these records when you're a little kid, and then next thing you know, you're an adult traveling the world with these people, and they're wonderful and they're nice and they're kind of scary and they're kind of crazy, but they're awesome. And you have these moments where you know nobody else on the planet is doing exactly what's happening right now. And what's happening right now might happen on every single tour that they ever do, but it wasn't happening with anyone else but us. And I'll never be in that position again in my life. What happened there was a diamond of my life that I'll always carry forward. And I just have a place in my heart for Agnostic Front beyond just putting out 4 of the best hardcore records of all time, plus lots of other very good records, but 4 of the greatest hardcore records of all time, being wonderful people and a wonderful band. They gave me an experience I could never have had anywhere else.
Awesome. Hatebreed? Well,
Hatebreed.
you mentioned a little bit.
Well, first of all, Hatebreed is like Hatebreed, right? Like, there's nothing like Hatebreed. Hatebreed because Jamie Josta emailed me, no booking agent emailed me. Jamie Josta emailed me like my nerdy little Aram, like in his apartment. Like, I'm in between like classes at school. Like, oh my God, I got an email from Jamie Josta. It's like, hey, do you guys want to play the show? It's like, fuck yeah, we want to play with Hatebreed. And it was at El Corazon, sold out show, front to back, filled with just people that look like they came out of like the underworld. Like, they look like the sewers had opened up and these people came out and just populated the pit, and Champion played, and it was great. I couldn't believe it. We had a great reaction. But when Hatebreed played, I felt like I was part of a muscle that was flexing. Like, it was insane to be in a band that in a room where a band was playing and had that kind of power. It was unbelievable. Also, what I will also say was very funny is that I was behind the merch table, and this big, dumb, like white power skinhead came up and was like super wasted and was like, maybe trying to pick a fight with me. I'm not quite sure. And put his foot up on the merch table and pointed at his shoelaces, which were of a certain color.
Oh, boy.
And he said, "Do you know what these shoelaces mean? Do you know what that means?" And I was like, before I could say something that would almost certainly have led to conflict, he then fell straight over backwards. And the next thing I knew is the guy's both feet were up in the air.
I feel like that's a complete story, like a complete analogy.
And Karen Fiegel was beside me, and we started laughing so hard, and he like lumbered up, and we were literally dying laughing. And instead of going any further, he did what was the smart thing to do, was to tuck his idiot tail and walk away. I don't know if I've ever laughed so hard in my entire life. Yeah, I'll never forget that night. So those would be the 3.
Right on. All right, my friend.
Huh.
I am going to relinquish control, as if I ever had any, and turn your podcast back over to you. You've been a wonderful guest.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today, and take it.
All right. Everybody, here's the other thing I got to say. First of all, thank you for everyone who has supported the podcast. It's been so cool to get these messages over the years. Like, there have been days where I've been like, I don't want to do this anymore. Screw this thing. There's other days where it's like, maybe this will just become what I do someday. I don't know what's going to happen. But what I do know is whenever I get a message from someone saying like, hey, and they'll talk to me about something specific in the podcast, I'll be like, damn, like, that's really awesome. My friend Steve from Death Threat, shout out Steve, love you, buddy. He sent me a message just this morning where I was feeling like maybe a little down. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this today. I got this message from him about the podcast we just did with Carl, and it really like lifted my day. So thanks for everyone who listens, who comments, who shares, all that. It really matters, because I have moved this podcast from being more like just promotion for the company to trying to generate something of worth. And when any of you give me feedback, like, thank you. It really makes me feel like we've done something. I also want to thank you, Dave. Dude, this podcast wouldn't exist without you. You helped me form up my thinking early days, and then it helped me execute in those first few awkward ones. So thank you, man, so much. Huge shout out to Tammy. Tamo, you're the best. I'm super proud of you for all the things that you've done and how you've grown in your role and all the things you do for our company. Again, I wouldn't be doing this without you. You're totally awesome. Spencer, hashtag own your shit. What was the other one? Hashtag life at full speed.
Life at full speed.
Spencer, you're awesome, man. Thank you for all the hard work you've done and pushing the envelope and all those things. It really makes a huge difference. Thank you, Alex, for all your work. Thank you, Monica, for being such an incredible partner and supporting me through all this. And thank you to all our guests. Like, thanks for sharing the stories, being out there, having the guts to talk about it. Like, you know, because I'm tough. I ask tough questions and I'm trying to create something cool. And I couldn't do any of this stuff without people being willing and having the courage to come out and talk. And I guess the final thing I want to say as we're closing off is, like, listen, my closest friends, not my closest, but many of my friends were like, hey man, I'm sorry. I've actually never listened to your podcast. I'm really sorry about that. And I'm like, that's cool. Like, I can't, there's a lot of podcasts out there. Like, listening to someone's podcast or listening to someone's record or doing one of those things, that's not the expectation when it comes to friendship. You know, it's like just being good friends to each other. The thing that I'd encourage everyone to think about, though, is like, if you want to start something, check out the people around you who have done a great version of it, who have tried something, who've been those people who've gone out there. Take a look at what they've done and get a sense of, if they did that, what could I do? And so if there's anyone out there who's thinking about starting their podcast, my biggest encouragement is to stop talking about it and just go out and do it. Pick a couple podcasts that you think are cool, really listen to it, and then just take the leap. It could be your friend's podcast. It could be your cousin's podcast. It could be like some huge podcast, whatever it is. Take a few listens, but don't overdo it. Don't overanalyze. Just record 3 or 4 episodes, put it out, and be ready for like 2 people to listen to it. And then 10 of your friends to be like, I'm sorry I didn't listen to your podcast. But don't worry about those 10 friends. They're still awesome friends. They're just busy people. But the 2 people that listen to it, if you know who they are, which you may or may not, get their advice, get their feedback, and then just keep going from there. Building up an audience is super hard. It takes a long time. You got to do it through iteration, and nothing comes easy when it comes to podcasting, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it. And if your podcast ends up having 50 people listen to it, but 20 of those people really take something from it, then that's a success. So get out and do it. So everyone, as we're closing off, 100, I can't believe it. Maybe we'll see you for 200 someday. Maybe I'll get to 101 and be like, God damn it, I'm done with this. But whatever it is, it's been a hell of a ride. And thanks everyone for joining us. So as we're closing off, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. My name is Aram Arslanian, and this is One Step Beyond.